Mass Effect has had a very tough time of it lately, and it is hard to believe it's been 8 years since 3. If I was betting money back then, I would have thought by the year 2020 we'd have a whole new trilogy of games. Instead, we got what felt like a failed spin-off in Andromeda, and now there's this remaster which just seems to be nowhere in sight. We've heard that it's coming soon for years, but October really did feel like Final Destination based on recent rumours. But a spanner has been thrown in the works, and troubled development has pushed this thing right back. Why? Let's jump in and find out. Hi, Stelden here. We all know that EA would do just about anything for an easy dollar, which is why I've always been surprised that this remaster didn't happen 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, outside of the Bethesda games, the Mass Effect trilogy is possibly the most popular mainstream RPG series out there, so to see how badly EA and Bioware have handled this IP is really quite sad. With Andromeda's failings, I do think that a lot of fans have basically given up on getting a proper Mass Effect game again, which actually raised interest in this remaster. Fans like myself pretty much thought, right, the series has gone to shit, let's at least get a proper re-release of the trilogy with all the overpriced DLC included, maybe some upgraded visuals, that would be really nice. You would think that that wouldn't be too much to ask, in what will eventually be a full price package, no doubt. Well, you would think so, but apparently that actually is asking too much because this remaster appears to be in trouble. There's a GameSpeak report doing the rounds that suggests that this remaster, it's not coming this year as previously thought. There's not a chance of that happening. To see a remaster having such a troubled development, it's really quite odd. The only time I'd say it's fair enough and understandable is when you get a really old game where the source files are just impossible to track down. But in Mass Effect's case, this is really recent. It's a mainstream game, so surely it would just be a matter of improving some textures, lighting, and packaging it all up. So what is it that's gone drastically wrong? And on a side note, it's quite funny because we've recently had the Mario 3D All-Stars on the Nintendo Switch, and that was very much just a collection that reportedly took a few months to make. And yet these Mass Effect remasters that should be along similar lines, you would think, seem like they've been in the pipeline forever. Well, the report going around suggests that it's actually Mass Effect 1 that's holding up this release. Supposedly they've been making some changes to make the trilogy a little more accessible and consistent across all the 3 games and have them all play the same. Based on this, I will give EA a little bit of credit. It sounds like it's not just a matter of re-releasing a few games and then calling it a remaster, give us your $60, thanks very much. They seem to at least be making a bit of an effort with these. Probably because they know the IP's already damaged enough, and a scuff release would likely be the final nail in the coffin for the series. This report says that Mass Effect 1's gameplay right now just isn't living up to the quality of the other titles, and I imagine it's because they're trying to make the shooting mechanics a lot more in line with 2 and 3. Now, I imagine that some fans would be quite mixed on this, because when I read fans' thoughts on the series, I do see plenty of people who very much enjoy Mass Effect 1's more traditional RPG experience, which of course is still a third-person shooter, but it does feel a lot more in line with the Knights of the Old Republic experience, despite being more action-based. Mass Effect 2, and to an even greater extent 3, do really expand on the action side, and they did remind me a little of Dead Space, another EA series which started out as a pure survival horror, so it had its genre, but then by the 3rd entry it was full-on action. Mass Effect 3 didn't quite go to that extent, but I think it's fair to say that pure RPG fans would love 1 or perhaps 2 the very most, and then those people out there who are just looking for a space opera shooter experience would possibly enjoy 3 the most out of the series. That is generally the mindset I see from different Mass Effect fans. EA have obviously not been able to get their vision for this up to snuff, and that means that this remaster, it's not coming until next year. When that will be, that is obviously up in the air, and it's pretty clear from all the rumours that the initial plan, I would say, was to announce the remaster probably early October and then release it in the same month. That would have been the initial plan. There's actually a reasonable amount of evidence suggesting that as well, such as a retail listing that went up on a website not too long ago. Given how close this was to actually happening this year, I do think EA made a pretty late decision in putting this off. And I do think it's because their priority is making sure this appeals to brand new fans. They're worried that little Johnny, who's heard so much about Mass Effect, he's heard about the trilogy, he's probably watched a few videos on YouTube of Captain Shepard shooting everything up, and then he sits down and plays the first Mass Effect in this collection, and he gives up on it due to the first game feeling a little bit clunky. Now, I personally am not too bothered by that. I think the first game plays fine, and I love the RPG elements. But from an EA standpoint, I can understand why they want the original trilogy to play consistently the same in this remaster, so that newcomers don't just give up on it. As a fan of the series, I can also appreciate that this remaster might bring in a bunch of new fans, and it will hopefully then encourage EA to make a real sequel to the trilogy. Something hub-based, not a sad attempt at bringing the series into the open world as we saw with Andromeda. So the question now becomes, how are EA going to change the first game so it does play like the others? Doing this is not a simple task. You can't simply throw in Shepard from Mass Effect 3 with the same mechanics, because it'll kill some of the level design and the underlying mechanics that the first game was designed around. Could they do tweaks to levels and the systems? I mean, they certainly could, but I do think that you then open yourself up to old school fans criticising it and saying that you've just changed too much, and due to that, it's not really a good remaster, it's like a bad reimagining. I do actually think that'd be a fair criticism, and what I do believe is that a reasonable and realistic solution instead would be just to have two options in the Mass Effect 1 menu. You can have the default one, which is more streamlined shooting, and that'll feel more like the later games in the series. They could even buff up your squad mates to cover for some of the shortcomings in combat and ensure that new players have a pretty smooth experience. However, in the menu, what I'd like to see is that you could then let players who want to experience the version that is a lot more true to the original, that should be something you can either select at the start of the game or back on your ship. I don't think this would create a lot of extra work, and hopefully it'll be something that works for both hardcore fans, but also the EA suits who just want the game to be accessible, they don't give a shit about all the old school stuff. If I had to pinpoint when this game will come out next year, I imagine EA is going to be shooting for March if all goes as planned. Both Mass Effect and Bioware games have had a pretty strong history of releasing in that earlier part of the year, and I don't think EA would really want to be spending another year or so on this title and spending all this budget just to tweak a 2007 game in Mass Effect 1. I expect we'll be playing this within 6 months, and the question will then become, what happens to Mass Effect then? Both EA and Bioware, I feel, really missed the mark on what Mass Effect was about as the series progressed. I don't know if they were following metrics or if they were simply trying to make it more appealing to non-RPG fans, but it really felt like the series got too far away from being character-based by the time we got to the third game. This is obviously subjective, but I don't think people's fond memories of the series comes from shooting enemies down linear corridors. I can get that in almost any third-person shooter this gen. That is not unique. For most, it was about the characters. It was about Garrus, Rex, Mordin, those sorts of people, or creatures, or whatever you want to call them, who you met along the way. And that is what turned the series into a classic for many, and ensured that it stood out from the crowd. I'm probably being controversial now, but I actually think that the focus on selling the trilogy element was actually a detriment to the series. I think they bit off a little bit more than they could chew in pitching the game being based around a clear 3-part story, where your choices, they all carry over, and that was because too many of the great characters were sacrificed to make it happen. What generally happened is any good characters that were involved in a big life or death choice were essentially background noise in the following game, because they had to design it around some people having let the person be killed off. I understand that it is not feasible to essentially make 2 or 3 games that are entirely different based on those choices, but by the time we got to Game 3, I just really felt like the cast was starting to lose its charm a little bit, as they were struggling to come up with characters as good as the ones that they'd let you kill off. The trilogy aspect certainly had some unique positives, and the overarching threats of the Reapers was certainly well done, I'm not going to deny that, but I really do think that a future Mass Effect game doesn't need a threat that big. Given Bioware seem to have lost their touch, I could actually see EA farming it out to Respawn, the creators of Star Wars Fallen Order, if they were to continue with the series. I do think Respawn's consistency, along with quality RPG writers who they could bring in, could then result in something much more along the lines of the earlier games, perhaps having a Shepard successor, build a new crew to take down smaller scale threats. I'd love to see more personal, character-based missions with perhaps a wider threat that's expanded on game to game to keep that added suspense. They had a winner on their hands with early Mass Effect, and why they squandered it with the likes of the Mass Effect 3 ending, along with Andromeda, just boggles the mind. It's surely not that hard. There's hardly any space opera games out there. A solidly made one with good characters and some decent RPG mechanics is always going to sell, but EA and co just seem to really struggle. It's certainly got to be troubled times at Bioware though. They seem to be on their last legs, Dragon Age 4 appears to be a last chance, and just to add salt into the wound, they're going to have a bunch of people who are super excited they're playing the Mass Effect Trilogy Remaster, and those same people are going to be asking, why aren't there any more games like this? What happened? And then to top it off, Baldur's Gate 3 is releasing soon, the sequel to, in my opinion, Bioware's best game, Baldur's Gate 2. And when you look at all of that, it's genuinely sad to see what Bioware now are. I certainly can't see EA being the ones to tell Bioware to get back to making quality RPGs. So what I'd really like to see is another studio rise up and make a true spiritual successor. I even think an isometric game could work. You could have combat similar to XCOM, something a little bit more tactical while still having that space opera theme. And the choices, the RPG elements like Mass Effect, they could all be in there but just done a little bit differently. And I'll say it again, I don't think third-person shooting is what made the series special, but EA and co, they just never really seem to realise it. When it comes to remasters, I'll admit I'm not really a massive fan. I would much rather a brand new game in a series, rather than just having someone like EA come along, spend 3 months twiddling their thumbs, re-release a title for full price, and expect you all to gobble it up. That to me, it's anti-consumer. It's not really helping the industry, because then these companies realise, right, we can just keep flogging these old titles and people buy them. What's the point of investing in a brand new IP? What's the point in coming up with a brand new sequel to a game that's kind of hard to develop for, and we usually fuck it up whenever we do? When it comes to the Mass Effect remaster though, I'm not too bothered by it, and that is mainly because these games had a lot of good DLC, and to get it, you've got to spend a fair bit of money because it is overpriced. So to have it all in one place, maybe waiting until it's on a sale, that could be a pretty decent deal for some people. So I'm expecting probably March next year. Hopefully in the future, whether it's a Mass Effect or another big space opera game, we get something awesome in the RPG genre, because it is lacking. We haven't had something like that for a while, and while Cyberpunk might be sci-fi, it is not really gonna scratch the Mass Effect itch, I'd say. They're very different titles. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please comment, like, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Thanks very much, and bye-bye.